Good morning. I'm Sunita Sarabji, and welcome to Murzban Shroff. Murzban is a Mumbai-based writer. He is the author of the short story collection Breathless in Bombay, which was nominated for the Commonwealth Prize. He followed that up with the delightful novel Waiting for Jonathan Koshi, based on a larger-than-life character and his group of friends. Shroff's third book is another collection of short stories, Third Eye Rising. The stories are set in both rural and urban India and provide a very rich glimpse of a culture struggling with the traditions of thousands of years and the present day. Murzban, I'd like to start out with the title story, Third Eye Rising, which is about a young married couple struggling to uphold the traditions of the very conservative family with which they live. Could you talk a little bit about that story and how you had told me that you had spent many years in the villages before you released this collection. Could you talk a little bit about that process and this story?
Well, Sunita, Third Eye Rising was my fourth book, and it kind of gave itself to me over a period of, I would say, almost about 17 years. So I call it a kind of a modular book because what happened was that in 2003, when I first got serious about writing, I kind of realized that if I wanted to be a pan-India writer, I would have to kind of start going to the villages. After all, 70% of India lives in its villages, so my writing couldn't be purely urban centric. And I also thought that going to the villages would help me to understand the urban milieu better in terms of, the fact that we have, at that point, we had almost 45% of Mumbai was kind of concentrated with slums. So I could understand the whole migration patterns into the city. So that's how my whole journey to the villages began. And when I went there initially, I was led there by a tremendous book written by Arundhati Roy called The Algebra of Infinite Justice. And that's what kind of sent me out to the villages. And the first thing I realized was there's something called man-made poverty, which is caused by displacement. So I had the opportunity to study the whole displacement issue, understand that, villagers, a lot of them were happy in the villages. They sourced everything they wanted from nature. They would get their food, their fodder, their firewood, even the bamboo that built their homes, the baskets they made and sold. They got all that from the forest. They didn't need to really they didn't really need to be in the cities, and yet they were being displaced en masse. So when I spoke to a lot of them and I said, why do you think this is happening? I mean, why are you guys being evicted from the villages? What is this pressure? What do you think is the whole game? A lot of them didn't know what the whole conspiracy was. They felt that it was just their karma, their suffering, So I realized there's a certain spiritual ethos that kind of makes them acquiescent towards their circumstances, And as far as the title story is concerned, so anyway, so when I came back to Mumbai, I obviously came back with an altered sensibility. I came back sensitized. I think that made a difference to my writing. I call it transformative writing because, you are transformed. So inevitably you end up transforming your writing. And I read this little piece in the Times of India, which said that there was a young sort of child bride as in a very young kind of newly married girl who was forced to go through an Agni Pariksha, a fidelity test to prove to her in-laws that she was chaste, So I was kind of aghast when I read that, and I tried to put myself in the mindset of this young girl who had to go through this test. And I said, what is it that would compel her to go through it? And maybe it would be her spiritual faith, like the displaced villagers. Maybe it was her faith in the fact that she was destined to suffer, and that she had to still continue with it and pay for her sins of a past life, or whatever, whether it's caste or gender exploitation. She had to go through that whole thing, So that's how I kind of wrote the story. And I kind of thought that it'd be interesting to project her husband as a wimp, but because of her spiritual faith and because she does the test, she passes the test, she transfers that power onto her husband and she empowers him. So I like this thing about having a kind of a fragile woman who gets strength from her spirituality and transfers that strength onto her man. So the man gets the strength to kind of rebel against his family and the patriarchy in his family. Okay, and stand by the woman. You know, so that was my kind of I should say aspirations for the rural woman, for the exploited woman. Which I projected onto her.
Absolutely. It reminds me of another story in the collection, which was also, I think you said, inspired by a true life case, Bhikkhu Bacha's poison. Could you talk a little bit about that story as well?
Certainly. So Bhikkhu Bacha's poison, there I got kind of fascinated by a migrant character who belonged to a lower caste. And I said, look, so what happens if in the village he's bogged down by his caste and he's supposed to do kind of menial scavenging work? But when he comes to the city to work, where once he's employed in the city, it's a chance for him to adopt a fresh identity and to try and forget his caste. But then what happens when he goes back to the village and his caste catches up with him? You know? Now, this story, Sunita, interestingly, came out of my travels to the villages of Bihar in East India. So in 2013, I spent a couple of weeks studying the condition of schools, studying the condition of schools and primary health centers in Bihar. And I was kind of aghast to see the schooling system there. I was aghast to see uh, uh, that primary health centers did not have oxygen cylinders, they did not have operating theaters, they did not have X-ray machines, and even essential medicines like anti-rabies, antibiotics, anti-snake bite serums were not available because they had been pilfered and sold by doctors, okay, who would start their own pharmacies next door. So when I saw these, crimes of omission and commission, I was aghast, and my whole that whole thing translated into experience with Bhikkhu Bacha's poison. But specifically, there was an incident which disturbed me largely, and that was the food poisoning case. This was in on 16th July 2013. 23 children of the Gandaban primary school in the Saran district of Bihar lost their lives due to food poisoning.
That's right.
Because somehow a toxic pesticide called monocrotophos, found its way in the rice and soybean curry, which was given to the children. The children complained to the principal, Meena Devi, of a foul smell in the food, but and Meena Devi was actually supposed to taste the food before giving it to them, which she had not done so. And when the children complained, and the school cook said that, look, this curry is unusually black in color, it looks dodgy, okay, the principal forced the children to eat it. Oof. And 23 children started vomiting violently. There were no ambulances. There were no hospitals. There were no doctors, no ambulances. So these kids had to be rushed to hospitals on motorcycle, and 23 of them lost their lives along the way. So when I read this, I was greatly disturbed. I thought, what happens if a migrant like Bhikkhu Bacha, he goes back to Bihar for his vacation, and there he suddenly has to transport these kids to hospital knowing that they're going to die, and how his memories catch up with him, the whole dichotomy of being a success in a city. When he goes back, his caste catches up with him. It really hasn't changed. So that's how this whole interplay between urban and rural came about. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'd like to ask you one more question before we read, and that is your previous books, Breathless in Bombay and Waiting for Jonathan Koshi. There you go. Are characters that you seem very intimately familiar with, your neighbors, your friends. Jonathan Koshi especially feels like a character that you really well knew and understood. And I wonder, coming into a very new society where you may not have been so familiar initially with the characters that you were writing about, how did you get to that process where you were able to write about them with the familiarity that you had with the characters in your previous stories?
Sunita, as I told you, as I mentioned, Third Eye Rising gave itself to me over a period of 17 years, and I had several trips to the villages. I went and studied the situation of tribal schools, in the Raigad district of Maharashtra. I went to the Satpuras. I spent time there with the tribals. I went to Madhya Pradesh, Bihar. So when I'm writing outside my milieu, I have a very simple recipe. Okay, I try and understand where these people are coming from. So it's not about me, it's not about the story. Yes, I do get taken up with issues, but it's always understanding where these people are coming from, you know, and trying to see what is the essence that makes up these people, what are their needs, what are their wants, what are their aspirations, you know. And villagers are by and large very simple and very hospitable, you know. I remember there was this one time we land up in this village, and it's like well past 1 a.m. And we go to this headman's house, and he just welcomes us, you know. He's, you know, his whole family gets to work, they're putting out these cots for us. And then I remember that in the morning, in the night, I remember feeling very cold and I was shivering. So I was all huddled up. And yet, when I woke up in the morning, I found this brand new starched blanket covering me. So I was like
Oh,
surprised. And I see this old timer, he's almost 85, 90-year-old, the head man. He's pulling on his BD and he says, you know, I woke up in the night to check on you guys and I found that you were shivering. So I climbed up on my loft and I got this blanket which my grandson had got for me. We have no use for these sort of things. We won't take it with you, you know? And I got thinking, I said, hey, you know, if this would happen in a city, that, you know, someone would come and sort of sleep outside my door, I would get all huffy about it, right? I would think it's encroachment. And here these guys don't know us. And not only have they opened their doors and hearts to us, but he's also covered me at night, you know?
right, right.
So it's all about knowing where they are coming from. You know, it's trying to understand where they are coming from. And genuinely, it's a process of sensitizing yourself. Automatically, it'll reflect in the work.
Absolutely. So, my favorite story of the collection was The Kite Maker's Dilemma. I just absolutely love this story. I wonder if you could read a portion of it for the viewers.
Oh, I'd be delighted to.
Thank you.
It does seem to be the perennial favorite.
Yeah, yes. The characters are very well drawn, I think, in this particular story.
So I'm going to read it in parts so that our viewers get a kind of idea about the kite maker and, you know, his modus operandi and also the background setting. So I'm just going to read two sections from it. So this is set in the pre the kite flying festival, which is Makar Sankranti, and the kite maker, who's Baba Hanush, who's a master kite maker. He's come to this village. He's come to this little hill town called Amrapali, and people are really excited because he's a wizard with kites. And though there are other kite makers in town and they're trying to flog their kites, but he's the man who's most sought after. So here we go. In the days before Makar Sankranti, all that the boys could think of was their kite. The thought would creep into their school books, into their study hours, and give them delicious daydreams of victory. How high could they take it this time? And how many kites could they cut along the way? To this purpose, gangs were formed, leaders were appointed, territories were defined, colors were identified and fought over, and strategies planned to fool and foil enemies. Baba Hanush could sense the excitement. So come 4 p.m. and he'd be out selling his kites. His fleet strapped to his back, he'd walk down the narrow lanes of Amrapali, holding in his hand a big friendly kite. Big wings, sharp wings, strong wings, he'd sing. Big bird in the sky, buy it now and watch it fly. Big bird in the sky, it's got the power to fly so high. Seeing a crowd gather, Baba Hanush would start dancing. Wearing a broad knowing smile, he would dance all the way to the banyan tree in the compound, and there under its leafy canopy, he would spread out his kites. Mentally, he'd prepare for a fight. A flurry of hands squabbling over the brighter designs. The first 3 days, he was always short a kite or two, until he threatened to pack his bag and leave, which of course he never did. This time too, Baba Hanush made his way around town, singing, dancing, and displaying his kites. After he had finished with the marketplace, he turned into Bahara Gully, a lane where many children live. His voice rang out loud and clear, cutting through the air like manja. Doors burst open, children ran out, the younger ones tried to jump up and catch the big bird. Why so expensive, Baba Hanush? The mothers would ask. And he would say solemnly, you know how thick the pollution is. Every year, the kites need to be stronger if they have to rise. And no one doubted his wisdom, for it was his kites that ruled the skies. I'm going to jump here. That day, as he made his way past the houses of Barakali, Baba Hanush noticed something strange. As he approached the last house, the one that was in a dilapidated condition, he saw behind a barred window a curtain flicker and a small boy peeking out hesitatingly. The door to the entrance of the house was bolted, and yet the boy was in there like a prisoner. Why was the boy locked up, he wondered, and why was he in the dark? Was he punished for something dreadful? Drawing in his breath, Baba Hanush sang and danced before the window. Then slowly he turned to show the boy his kites. After a while, he moved on. But before that, he noticed that the curtain was drawn back fully. That day, he sold all his kites and made 3,600 rupees. But that day, he failed to enjoy his dinner and forgot to tip the waiter who got him his pan. A strange mood seemed to have settled over him, a dark, liquid unease. Do we have some time to go on?
Fantastic. Yes. Yeah, you definitely have time to go on, please.
Oh, excellent. So I'm going to read a little bit more then. The next day, Baba Hanush woke up early. He had orders which he had to deliver by evening. Besides, there'd be the usual stock of walk-in customers, now that word of his presence had gotten around. He worked without a break till 3 p.m., stacking up his kites neatly in a corner. After lunch, he tried to take a nap, but tossed and turned. He woke up with a heavy head. Dragging himself to the trough outside, he opened the tap and let the water gush into his palms. He slapped the water in his face once, twice, thrice. Then, using a table napkin pocketed from the daba, he dried his face and beard. He went inside and collected his kites, pausing to look at the big bird. He looked at it approvingly, a real enticer, then walked out into the street. Big bird in the sky, big bird in the sky, never was a kite that flew so high. Big bird in the sky, miss out now and later you will cry. His voice pierced the quiet hill town. The children came out and squealed. This was unlike any kite they'd ever seen. And Baba Hanush danced slowly, giving the children enough time to view the kite from all angles. When he reached the house at the end, he slowed down further and drew close, but kept a small distance from the window. The big bird fluttered and pulled like a dog at its leash. Baba Hanu sang, "This is the one, the biggest bird in the sky. So high it will rise, you won't see it with your eye. So come, my friend, and see if I lie, for this is the bird you will want to fly." The children cheered and leapt joyously. Baba Hanush kept his eyes riveted to the window. As he turned, he saw the movement he had been waiting for. The shift of a curtain, a face half hidden. He saw the face, partly but clearly, a curious watchful eye, tense frozen lips, and below the chin, skin that was horribly burnt and shriveled, all the way down to the neck region. He shivered, his footsteps sagged. Hi Allah, he thought, what could have happened to this boy? This was not the face of childhood. But even as he despaired, the curtain was drawn back into place. After that, Baba Hanush was scarcely aware of the kites he sold. Mechanically, he would stuff the notes in his pocket, not caring to count them. So this is the whole conflict in the story that, Baba Hanush, in the midst of all this exuberance, in the midst of his peak sales, he finds his little boy who's in self-imposed exile. And then Baba Hanush takes it on himself to kind of deliver to the boy his freedom, the kite signifying, a metaphor for his freedom there.
Freedom, absolutely. Could you talk a little bit about what inspired this story?
So, Sunita, one of my little triggers, creative writing triggers, is always a character type, And somehow I had this thing about this kite maker who's had a sad backstory, but his whole purpose in life is to impart joys through children. And he's this big, clumsy, awkward, dancing, singing character, So I thought, let me go with him and then see. And then also, I also find that childhood for a lot of people can be lonely. I mean, though I had an extremely happy childhood, in a certain sense, I enjoyed my solitude because I was always lost in the world of books, Right. So I think in some way, I could relate the world of books to a kind of a lonely house, where you're cooped in, where you actually start enjoying the darkness, like you start enjoying an alternate life. So I think I kind of use that aspect of myself, the dreamer, the thinker, the kind of, the introspective nature of myself. And at the same time, this exuberant kite maker who wants to deliver joy to children. Yeah. So I kind of started playing with these two characters, and that's where it went.
Fantastic. And what are you working on? Final question. What are you working on next?
So at the moment, I'm working on this light, frothy novel, and it's kind of based in Bombay in the 80s. And Bombay was a very permissive place at that point, a very live and let live kind of place. And there was none of this current intolerance that you're seeing. And, there were no real, there were really no distinctions between communities. And, it was a very, very flat society kind of thing. Even the cops would turn a lot of blind eye to, like, little teenage aberrations, adolescent aberrations. So it's this very light, frothy novel set in the 80s. And, also this whole influence of rock and roll on the generation that grew up in the 80s. It takes that into account. And I'm working on a large issue-based Mumbai collection as well. Yeah. So these are the two projects I'm kind of balancing right now.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sunita. Thank you.
Pleasure. Yeah.
Yeah. And before we wrap up, I want to say a huge thank you to Harvey and B and Jenny of Eastwind Books of Berkeley. This is one bookstore that has been hugely supportive of my work. It has literally proved that the world is a small place. And although I'm based in Mumbai, it makes no difference. They've kind of promoted my books very passionately and very consistently. And I'm deeply grateful that we have independent stores like this and staffed and run by people like Harvey, B, and Jenny. I'm very, very grateful. Sunita, thank you very much. As always, you've been very insightful, and I wish you could have taken this further, but I'm sure there'll be other opportunities. Thanks a million, guys. Really appreciate this.